Hello, my old friends. Are you still doing all right these days? The house is quiet this morning, the kind of quiet you can hear. The sunlight hasn't fully settled yet. It stretches thin across the kitchen floor, touching the edges of the old oak table where I sit. There's a cup of lukewarm tea by my hand, and beside it, my other hand rests lightly on my wrist. Two fingers pressing against skin, feeling for rhythm. At first, I can't find it. Then there it is, faint, hesitant, irregular. Thump, 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 pause, thump. It's a sound you don't hear so much as feel small. Uneven ripples under the skin. For a second, I think maybe I've miscounted. Maybe my fingers are in the wrong spot. I move them slightly, press again. Wait. But no, the beat really is off. The heart has its moods. I remind myself, sometimes it wakes tired, like an old engine that takes a few tries before it hums smoothly again. Still, the pause catches my breath in the throat. That's the thing about age. The older you get, the more the body surprises you. Not with pain, but with patterns you can't predict anymore. I've spent half a century teaching people to listen for this, the subtle language of the pulse. You can learn a lot from your wrist. I used to say, it tells you more truth than your reflection does. And yet, here I am, 85 years old, realizing that I haven't listened to my own in a while. Maybe it started last night. I'd been restless. I'd stayed up late reading letters from former patients, stories of their grandchildren, their gardens, their morning walks. I drank half a cup of tea too late, lay awake, thinking about the years I lost in hospitals chasing emergencies that sometimes could have been prevented. When I finally drifted to sleep, my heart felt busy, not painful, not loud, just out of rhythm, like a clock trying to catch up with itself. And now, in the gentle quiet of morning, I can feel the echo of that chaos. The pulse under my fingers feels like memory old, familiar, stubborn. I can almost hear it saying, "You've rushed enough. Old man, breathe now." That voice isn't fear. It's recognition. I once had a patient named Margaret, 77, a retired pianist. She came to me because she said her music felt uneven. That's how she described it. The notes are still there, but the rhythm keeps tripping. I ran an EKG, atrial fibrillation, irregular, persistent, but manageable. She looked at the printout, her eyes gentle but puzzled. "It doesn't hurt," she said. "I just feel not myself." That's the sentence I never forgot. Not myself. She wasn't talking about the arrhythmia. She was talking about what it stole her trust in her own rhythm. We started her on treatment, taught her how to check her pulse each morning, 2 fingers on the wrist, 30 seconds of quiet listening. It wasn't just medical. It was emotional. A way for her to stay connected to the music of her own life. A month later, she came back smiling. "It's still irregular," she said, "but I don't fear it anymore. I can follow it again." That's when I began to understand that medicine alone doesn't heal rhythm awareness, does. And now, decades later, I find myself doing exactly what I once taught her, sitting in the morning light, listening, counting, accepting. The irony isn't lost on me. I lift my wrist closer to my ear, as if sound could help me understand what feeling already knows. It's a strange thing, this intimacy with one's own pulse. It feels like holding conversation with time itself. You realize that each beat isn't guaranteed. It's a choice the body makes, over and over, to stay alive. There's something deeply humbling about that. I close my eyes and breathe slowly in for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. The breath calms the space around the heartbeat, like smoothing a wrinkled sheet. The rhythm steadies a little, not perfect, not consistent, but calmer. That's when realization hits me, not as fear, but as gratitude. The heart doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be heard. For so many years, I thought my job was to control it, to regulate, to measure, to prescribe. But maybe the real work was to listen, to teach people that their pulse isn't an alarm, it's a language. And the 1%, those rare few who age gracefully, whose hearts stay calm through all of life's noise, they speak that language fluently. They check their pulse, not in fear, but in curiosity. They breathe deeply, rest regularly, and never let the world set their tempo. Their secret isn't medicine. It's awareness wrapped in gentleness. I take another breath, feeling the air fill my lungs. The sound in my chest softens. The pulse in my wrist finds a rhythm again, slow and patient. It's as if the heart just needed to be acknowledged to be told, "You're doing fine." Outside, a sparrow lands on the fence post. The world feels in rhythm again. Or maybe I've simply fallen back into its pace. It's strange, isn't it? How something as small as the pulse can teach you so much about life itself, how every beat, no matter how uneven, is still part of the same song. I glance at the cup of tea. It's gone cold. But I smile anyway. This morning wasn't wasted. It was a reminder that listening is still healing, even after all these years. Before standing, I checked the pulse one more time. Thump, thump, thump. Still irregular, but steady enough. It feels less like a symptom and more like a companion, now a heartbeat with character. As old hearts often are, I whisper softly, half to myself, half to the rhythm beneath my fingertips. All right then, we'll keep time together. And as I rise, I feel a small, simple peace. The kind that comes not from fixing, but from understanding. I'll make a note to check it again tomorrow morning. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Because every morning the heart still beats is another morning to listen. The afternoon light has a softness to it, the kind that turns everything gold for a while. Before fading, I sit by the window again, my stethoscope on the table beside a folded newspaper. I haven't read. The air feels calm, but inside my chest, the rhythm still carries a faint unpredictability. Not dangerous, not sharp, just slightly uncertain. It doesn't frighten me anymore. Not the way it might have years ago. Age gives you a different kind of patience, the kind that lets you sit beside imperfection without needing to fix it right away. Still, I remember the fear it brings in others. I've seen that look, the quiet panic in the eyes of someone who feels their heart stutter for the first time. It's not the fear of dying. It's the fear that something so constant, so familiar, could suddenly become unreliable. One woman, in particular, comes to mind. Her name was Alma. She was 83, thin as a reed, with hands that trembled slightly, even when she smiled. She came to see me one spring morning, clutching a small notebook she'd filled with numbers, pulse readings, times of day, notes like fluttering at breakfast, quai during prayer. Her handwriting shook, but the discipline in it was remarkable. "I think my heart's lost its memory," she said softly. "It doesn't remember how to keep time." Her pulse was irregular. Yes, atrial fibrillation. Intermittent. But what struck me most wasn't the irregularity itself. It was the sorrow in her voice. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of feeling disconnected from her own body. We talked for a long time that day. I told her that the heart isn't broken when it beats unevenly. It's adapting. Sometimes it races to chase anxiety. Sometimes it pauses to catch its breath. I showed her how to count her pulse, how to breathe with it, not against it. We practiced together, fingers at the wrist. Deep breath in, slow. Exhale out. She smiled when she realized that her breathing could slow her heart, that her awareness could guide it back toward calm. "Feels like I'm teaching it to dance again," she said. And maybe she was. She came back 2 weeks later with a different notebook, same notes. But this time she'd added small comments beside the numbers. "Skipped once, but I stayed calm." Irregular again, breathed through it. Better today. Maybe it was the sunrise. F6. Her heart hadn't healed in the way medicine defines healing, but she'd made peace with its rhythm. That, I realized, was its own kind of cure. The longer I practiced, the more I saw that pattern, the healing that doesn't come from pills or procedures, but from presence, from learning to listen to the body without judgment. There was Harold, a retired carpenter who used to panic whenever his pulse sped up. He'd sit on the edge of the bed, counting beats with trembling hands, terrified of each extra thump. When we spoke, I told him something I'd come to believe deeply. The heart is a drummer, not a metronome. It doesn't owe you perfection, only persistence. That made him laugh. From then on, whenever his pulse fluttered, he'd tap his fingers on his knee and say, "All right, old drummer, I'll follow your lead." A year later, he brought me a small wooden sculpture. A heart, carved from maple, polished smooth. He'd etched the words, "Keep the beat," on the base. I still keep it on my shelf. These moments remind me that the 1%, those rare souls who never fear their arrhythmia, aren't the ones with perfect hearts. They're the ones who've made peace with their imperfect ones. They've learned that fear accelerates the rhythm, while acceptance steadies it. That's something I've come to feel in my own body now. When I let worry creep in, the pulse flutters. When I breathe and smile, it evens out again. The heart listens closely to how you speak to it. Some afternoons, I sit quietly and count 30 seconds of listening. No judgment. If it skips, I just whisper, "I'm still here," and it seems to answer back, "So am I." It's strange, but those few seconds of calm awareness change everything. They turn anxiety into connection. They turn an unpredictable heartbeat into a familiar friend. That's what I wish I could tell every patient who's ever feared that first flutter your heart isn't failing you. It's reminding you to slow down, to come home to yourself. When the rhythm falters, it isn't saying danger. It's saying, "Notice me." I remember once, years ago, sitting with a man named Louis in the hospital. His monitor showed a wild, chaotic pattern AFib in full swing. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. I sat beside him, held his wrist, and said, "Listen to it with me." He frowned. "To what?" "To the chaos." I said, "It's still yours." He took a shaky breath. The monitor kept jumping, but as he exhaled, his pulse softened. "Feels less scary when I listen," he whispered. And that's the truth. Most of us forget. Fear grows in the silence we refuse to fill with understanding. Now, as I sit here, decades later, I find that I've become my own patient. My pulse isn't perfect. My rhythm wanders. But when I listen, when I breathe, when I choose compassion over control, it finds its way home again. The 1% live like that every day. They wake with patience, breathe before rushing, touch their pulse, not to count the seconds, but to greet the day. They measure not just their heartbeats, but their gratitude between them. Evening drifts in slowly now. The sun has slipped behind the trees, and the light through the window turns amber. I place 2 fingers back on my wrist, the same way I taught hundreds of others to do, and count 1, 2, pause, 1 to 2. Irregular, yes, but it no longer feels wrong. It feels human. I close my eyes, breathe in deeply through the nose, hold, then exhale through the mouth. 4, 7, 8. The rhythm follows, not perfect, not flawless, but steady enough to live by. And maybe that's all we're really chasing, not a perfect rhythm, but one that forgives its own pauses. As I lower my hand, I realize the air feels lighter. My shoulders have dropped. My mind has keyed. And for the first time all day, my heart feels like part of the silence instead of an interruption to it. Tomorrow morning, I'll check my pulse again, not to find what's wrong, but to remind myself of what's still right, because that's what living with age and wisdom really is. The practice of noticing life, one heartbeat at a time. The night comes quietly, like an old friend who no longer knocks before entering it. The lamps are low, the air still warm from the afternoon sun, and in this stillness, the sound of my own breathing fills the room slow, deliberate, patient. I've always liked this hour of the day. It's when the world forgets its noise, and you can finally hear what your heart has been trying to say all along. When I was younger, I used to chase silence through control medicine, schedules, caffeine-free diets, sleep charts, breathing timers, but real peace never came from calculation. It came from surrender. The truth I wish I had known earlier is this: the heart's rhythm isn't a machine to be programmed. It's a conversation, one between your breath, your mind, and the quiet corners of your life. Tonight, my pulse feels soft under the fingers. It skips every now and then, but I no longer flinch when it does. I simply breathe with it. In through the nose, 4 seconds. Hold 7 seconds. Out through the mouth, 8 seconds. That simple rhythm, the one I use to teach my patients to calm their storms, feels like a prayer now. It doesn't fix anything. It just steadies the world long enough for the fear to lose its grip. I think of those who are still learning to live with their uneven beats, the men and women who lie awake counting, worrying, wishing for perfect silence in their chest. I want to tell them this. Perfection isn't peace. Peace is the moment when you stop fighting the noise, when you stop asking your heart to be young again, and instead thank it for being loyal enough to still show up every single day. Despite everything you've asked of it, that's what the 1% have always understood. They don't fear their rhythm, they honor it. They don't measure health by how steady their hearts sound, but by how kindly they treat themselves when it falters. Some of them check their pulse every morning, not because they're afraid, but because it's their way of saying good morning to the body that has carried them this far. Others sit by the window with tea, like I do, and breathe until the pulse in their wrist feels like a gentle metronome again. They know that each breath is an act of care, that calm is not something you find, but something you practice. I used to believe the heart spoke only in numbers, beats per minute, blood pressure, EKG lines. But over the years, I've learned it speaks most clearly in pauses. When it hesitates, it isn't betraying you. It's reminding you to rest. The human heart has been beating inside you since before you could form a memory. It has worked through every sorrow, every excitement, every sleepless night, and still, it wakes each morning to ask for another chance. That is not weakness. That is devotion. So tonight, as the clock ticks softly in the corner, I rest both hands on the table, palms down, feeling the subtle pulse in my wrists left, right, uneven but alive. The beat travels up the arms, joins with the slow rhythm of my breathing, and for a moment, everything, the years, the memories, the small mistakes and gentle lessons feels synchronized. It's not about curing arrhythmia. It's about restoring the harmony between effort and ease, between control and trust. I think of Alma and Harold, and all the others who found peace not in the absence of irregularity, but in their acceptance of it. They belong to that quiet 1%. Not because their hearts are perfect, but because their spirits learned to be. If you're listening to this, I hope you take a moment now. Put your fingers gently on your wrist. Don't rush. Don't count yet. Just notice. Feel the texture of your skin, the faint push beneath it. A pulse that has kept you company through every joy, every loss, every ordinary morning you've ever lived. Now, breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Once more. Let the breath and the pulse learn each other's rhythm. That's the habit that keeps the heart young, not medicine, not luck, but a daily act of noticing. If you practice this often enough, you'll find that the body remembers. The pulse will begin to mirror your calm. And one day, without realizing when it happened, you'll join that 1%, the quiet few, who live with grace, whose hearts never forget how to rest. Even when the rhythm skips, the tea on the table has cooled again, as it always does when I start thinking too long. I lift it anyway, sip the last of it, and smile at the faint echo of my pulse in the cup's handle. Tump, pause, tump, still steady enough to whisper, "You're doing fine." That's how I'll end this evening, not with a prescription, not with advice, but with a promise. To listen, to breathe, to let the rhythm find me where I am. Because in the quiet between each heartbeat lives the simplest truth I've ever known. The heart doesn't need to be perfect, only present. Now, take one last deep breath with me. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. Good. That's enough for tonight.